The grand citadel of Stellara thrummed with energy as thousands of beings from every corner of the dying galaxy gathered. Towering spires of jagged black crystal pierced the pale violet sky, their surfaces reflecting the dying light of the galaxy's fading star. This monumental structure, built atop the shattered remnants of a forgotten moon, had stood for millennia, an eternal symbol of power and survival amidst the encroaching void. Around the central arena, an array of alien species congregated in awe. Humanoid figures with glowing, liquid silver skin spoke in soft, melodic tones, their eyes flickering like distant stars. At their side, towering beings of living metal glided silently, their bodies pulsing with energy, while translucent entities, their forms constantly shifting, floated above the ground, communicating through harmonic frequencies. Far above, hovering insectoid creatures, their exoskeletons gleaming like jewels, silently observed the gathering. The air itself vibrated with anticipation, for today was no ordinary occasion. The Ascension Rite, an ancient ceremony that determined the fate of the galaxy, was about to begin, with the stars themselves slowly dying and hope hanging by a thread. This event held the weight of the universe's future. Only one could claim the title of Supreme Sovereign, the chosen ruler of the galaxy's last remnants. And the galaxy's queen, whose reign had already been marred by decades of strife, stood at the edge of this precipice, ready to face the test that would either redeem or destroy her legacy. As the first ancient bell tolled, its resonant sound echoing through the void, the audience fell into a profound silence, their collective breath held as the queen's procession began. Lyrakesh, the youngest and least likely contender for the title of Supreme Sovereign, strolled into the grand citadel's arena with an air of casual defiance. Unlike the regal, battle-hardened monarchs and battle-worn strategists who surrounded her, Lyra was a scrappy outcast from the fringes of the galaxy, known more for her sharp tongue and uncanny ability to charm the universe's most dangerous criminals than her political prowess. She didn't walk, she sauntered, clad in a simple leather jacket, mismatched boots, and a worn scarf she'd scavenged from a dying planet. Lyra didn't look like she belonged in the midst of royalty. Her unkempt dark hair fluttered in the ethereal breeze, and her eyes, one blue, one a striking amber, held the sort of mischievous glint that made even the most hardened of warlords raise an eyebrow. While the other contenders stood rigidly, practicing ancient combat forms or analyzing data streams with cold precision, Lyra leaned against the nearest column, idly inspecting the chipped paint on her boots. "Do any of you know where the nearest tavern is?" she asked, half sarcastically, glancing around at the imposing figures. "Or do we just drink starlight and call it a day?" The silence that followed was thick with confusion and disbelief. Her rivals, with their centuries of lineage and royal bloodlines, shot her disdainful looks, murmuring among themselves. She wasn't supposed to be here. She didn't fit the mold. Yet there was something undeniably magnetic about her, a fearless audacity that hinted at untapped potential. As the ceremonial horn sounded in the distance, signaling the start of the trial, Lyra straightened, adjusted her scarf, and gave one last smirk. "All right, let's see if I can't shake things up a bit." She wasn't the galaxy's perfect ruler, but she might just be the one they needed. The trial to become the supreme sovereign of the dying galaxy was no mere competition. It was a ruthless battle for survival, an ancient tradition dating back to the earliest days of galactic civilization. To win, one had to prove not only their strength and wisdom, but their ability to command the future of a galaxy on the brink of extinction. It was a trial of minds and might, a dangerous, deadly game where even the slightest mistake could mean the end of a reign or a life. Lyrakesh's primary rival was none other than Queen Selene Veres, the long-standing ruler of the most prosperous star systems in the galaxy, and a symbol of the old regime. Selene was an imposing figure, her regal beauty only matched by her ruthless intelligence. Her silver hair, braided in elaborate patterns that signified her high rank, shimmered under the cold light of the citadel. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, never missed a detail. She had spent decades perfecting the art of diplomacy, warfare, and intrigue, an immaculate strategist who commanded the loyalty of the galaxy's most powerful military factions. Where Lyra was an unpredictable wild card, Selene was the epitome of control. Every move she made was calculated, every word measured. Her supporters had been waiting for this moment for years, convinced that she was the only one capable of stabilizing the galaxy in its final days. To them, her reign was a return to the order they so desperately craved. As Lyra entered the arena, she could feel Selene's gaze from across the crowded chamber. It was a look of quiet contempt, the kind of expression reserved for those who were beneath her. A scavenger with no bloodline, Selene had once whispered to her inner circle. She is nothing but a fleeting spark, destined to burn out before she even realizes her potential. Lyra, however, was no stranger to being underestimated, but facing off against Selene with all her experience, resources, and power seemed almost impossible. The odds were stacked so high against Lyra that the betting markets had labeled her victory as a statistical impossibility. But Lyra had something none of them could predict, an unshakable resolve and a cunning born from surviving in the galaxy's darkest corners. As the ceremony began and the first of the trials were announced, she knew that her path to redemption wouldn't be won by sheer might or strategy alone. She would have to outwit Selene at every turn. The first challenge was set, a deadly, high-stakes negotiation between the galaxy's most dangerous factions, whoever could broker peace, or, in the worst case, outmaneuver their opponents, would take the first step toward the throne. Lyra knew she wasn't as skilled in diplomacy as Selene, but one thing she knew better than anyone was how to leverage chaos into opportunity. This trial would determine everything. The galaxy was watching, and for Lyra, this was her moment to prove that a dying galaxy needed more than just tradition. It needed someone willing to fight for the future, no matter the odds. Lyra Kesh wasn't preparing like the others. She wasn't even trying to fit in. As the other contenders lined up for the first trial, sitting in perfect posture, scanning databases, and reviewing detailed strategies, Lyra was sprawled out on the floor of her private chamber, one boot off and tossed across the room, the other propped up on a table. She was half-heartedly tossing a small, brightly colored rock into the air and catching it with her left hand while humming an old Earth tune. Her room, unlike the pristine, high-tech quarters of the other contestants, looked more like a cluttered storage unit. Tools, star maps, and half-eaten snacks scattered about. On the far wall, an old, cracked mirror reflected a girl with messy hair and a smirk that seemed to scream, "I don't belong here. Can someone tell me where I can get a decent cup of coffee around here?" Lyra asked aloud, not at anyone in particular, but loud enough for the two guards standing outside her door to hear. She threw the rock one last time, watched it sail across the room and land in a jar labeled, "Things I Might Need Later," which, to be honest, was just a jar filled with random junk, then sighed with exaggerated disappointment. How is a girl supposed to get anything done in a place like this? One of the guards peeked inside, eyebrow raised. Your Majesty." Yeah, just Lyra will do. We're not doing that royal thing. Ever." She grinned, throwing him a casual salute. "Besides that, Your Majesty nonsense makes me feel like I should be wearing a crown. And trust me, the only crown I wear is a dented one." The guard blinked, not sure how to respond, while Lyra continued her rock-throwing routine as though this were the most normal thing in the galaxy. The awkward silence stretched on for a moment before she popped up and stretched dramatically. All right, no more distractions. Time to put on my serious face." She grabbed a small data pad and thumbed through it for a moment, glancing at the list of factions she'd need to negotiate with in the upcoming trial. Then, in one swift motion, she tossed the pad aside and leaned back in her chair, propping her boots up once more. "Ugh, I'll deal with it later. Negotiation? Puff, I'll just wing it." The sound of a door slamming shut echoed through the halls, and Lyra knew it was another contender passing by. No doubt one of them trying to perfect their negotiation tactics or review centuries of political history. It made her grin. "What was I thinking?" she mused aloud. "I mean, seriously, who needs all that boring history when you can just make your own? Besides, I'm pretty sure if you smile, throw a couple compliments, and mention how absolutely amazing the other side is, things usually work out. It's not rocket science." She kicked her boot off the table and stood up, brushing imaginary dust from her jacket. With a satisfied grin, she cracked her knuckles. "Okay, let's go make some history, shall we?" Lyra's unpredictable approach was exactly what her competitors didn't see coming. While the galaxy's elite spent their time fine-tuning every detail of their strategies, She was too busy laughing, relaxing, and trusting her gut. And that her unflinching ability to be utterly herself might just be the secret to her success. The first match was a test of wit and nerve, a negotiation challenge set in a grand, holographic simulation of the most volatile region in the galaxy, the Rift of Charybdis. The factions Lyra had to broker peace with were notorious for their complex, egotistical leaders, each one more unpredictable and stubborn than the last. Lyra's first opponent, Lord Cormac, was a towering being made entirely of energy, his form crackling with plasma and light, his very presence sending waves of heat into the surrounding air. Cormac was a master of intimidation, known for forcing opponents to concede with nothing more than a heated glare. He had spent decades controlling his emotions with intense discipline, and his reputation as a tactician was nearly unmatched. The room pulsed with tension as the digital interface began the negotiation. Cormac's hologram shimmered in front of Lyra, his voice booming. "You have no standing here, human. Your lack of tradition will be your downfall." Lyra, on the other hand, didn't flinch. She casually leaned back in her chair, hand behind her head, and smirked. "So, what you're saying is, you're gonna zap me with your little lightning bolts and call it a day? Cute. But nah, I'm good. Let's talk." Cormac's plasma body crackled ominously, sending arcs of electricity snapping across the simulated battlefield. His voice deepened. "I'll give you one chance to back down, little human." Lyra, grinning like she just won the lottery, pulled out her datapad and began fiddling with it, tapping away as though the entire situation were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Then, with a sudden flourish, she activated a small device she concealed in her jacket pocket. A bright laser pointer. She aimed it straight at Cormac's holographic face. The energy being froze mid-motion, confused. The plasma light that made up his form flickered in a scattered, chaotic manner as his form sputtered. "What is this?" Lyra continued to wave the red around, making it dance in the air like a playful cat toy. "Come on, I thought you liked some entertainment while we get down to business." She didn't even bother to look up, casually tapping a few more commands on her datapad. "Oh, by the way, have you tried diplomacy, or are you just going to try to zap me into submission all day?" As expected, Cormac's anger flared. His body crackled with more intensity as he shouted, "Enough! You will—" But before he could finish, Lyra's voice cut through. "We don't have time for this. Let's make a deal, or you can just keep zapping the air and look like a fool." To his credit, the being tried to regain his composure. But Lyra had already won. Her playful defiance and quick thinking had thrown off his strategy, leaving him in a state of confusion and frustration. By the time he recalibrated, Lyra had already brokered an agreement between the opposing factions, using humor, distractions, and sheer audacity to win the day. The energy being was left standing in stunned silence as the virtual simulation ended. In her second match, Lyra faced Zerath of the Tlari, a psychic warrior who could manipulate minds with a mere thought. The arena was set in a barren asteroid field where they'd be required to navigate and survive while competing for valuable resources. Zerath, known for her mind-bending abilities, was a threat on an intellectual level, able to manipulate emotions and thoughts, leaving opponents disoriented and defeated. Lyra entered the arena with her usual nonchalance, tipping her jacket back as she surveyed the asteroids. Zerath, however, immediately took control of the environment, sending Lyra's vision into a swirl of nightmarish hallucinations. Endless, twisting corridors, faces of lost friends, and sudden, terrifying flashes of her own death. For most, this would be the end of the match. But Lyra? She simply laughed, shaking her head. "Wow, this is impressive, but I've been to worse parties." Instead of trying to fight the psychic influence, Lyra simply ignored it. She closed her eyes and began singing softly. "I'm a little teapot, short and stout." Her voice was calm, almost sing-song, as she marched through the hallucinations. The images of destruction and fear couldn't reach her, not because of mental fortitude, but because Lyra's disarmingly casual attitude made it impossible for her opponent to break her. Zerath, stunned by the audacity of Lyra's approach, faltered for just a moment. That was all the time Lyra needed. She locked eyes with the psychic warrior, who was momentarily distracted by Lyra's sheer absurdity, and quickly manipulated the arena's resources to her advantage. With a swift motion, she cornered Zerath and forced a surrender. "Nice try, but you're going to have to do better than that to mess with me," Lyra said with a wink, as the psychic's influence over her faded away. Queen Selene Very sat in her private chamber, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the cold, black surface of her obsidian desk. Before her, a holographic display flickered, showing the latest match between Lyrakesh and Lord Cormac. She had watched every one of Lyra's trials with a mixture of growing frustration and curiosity. Selene had expected Lyra to be nothing more than a reckless anomaly, a fleeting spark that would fizzle out the moment it encountered real power. But as the matches unfolded, it became clear that Lyra wasn't just some wild card. She was different. The energy being, Lord Cormac, had been a seasoned tactician. He had every advantage in terms of experience, power, and reputation. And yet, Lyra had managed to outwit him, using nothing but sheer unpredictability. She didn't even take him seriously. Selene thought bitterly, watching the scene where Lyra had used a laser pointer to throw Cormac off balance. What kind of strategy is that? Selene leaned forward, her sharp gaze fixed on the display as Lyra celebrated her win with her usual insufferable grin. The audacity, the boldness of it, it was maddening. "This is no longer a game," Selene muttered to herself, her lips curling into a thin, tight line. "This human is making a mockery of tradition." For centuries, the rules had been clear. The galaxy's leaders were chosen through trials of intellect, strength, and political acumen. One had to adhere to the expected methods, the ancient codes of combat, diplomacy, and strategy. The winners were those who displayed control over their emotions, control over their decisions, control over the situation. But Lyra didn't follow any of those rules. She was chaotic, impulsive, and worse, she was winning. Selene's mind raced. What is it that I'm missing? Lyra's strategies weren't polished like Selene's own. They weren't the product of years of study, careful planning, or understanding the galaxy's complexities. Instead, Lyra's victory seemed to hinge on her ability to break expectations, to throw her opponents off balance by simply being herself. Selene could feel the heat rise in her chest as she reviewed Lyra's last match against the psychic Zerath. Instead of defending herself against a mental assault, Lyra had smiled, laughed, and humiliated Zerath with ease. Selene had expected her to break under pressure, but instead, Lyra had twisted the situation to her advantage with the sheer force of her defiance. "Impossible," Selene whispered, her fists clenching in frustration. "This is not how it's supposed to be." In all her years of ruling, Selene had come to respect tradition above all else. The galaxy had thrived on order, on hierarchy, on clear, structured systems. To break those rules was to threaten the very foundation upon which the galaxy's civilizations had been built. And this girl, this outsider, is playing by no rules at all. A deep, unsettling realization began to form in Selene's mind. She isn't just defying tradition. She's rewriting the rules entirely. Her gaze hardened. For all her accomplishments, all the years of power and rule, there was something raw and unpredictable about Lyra that Selene could not comprehend, and that, more than anything, made her dangerous. "She has no place in this galaxy," Selene muttered, her voice filled with cold, unwavering conviction. "I will not let her destroy everything we've worked for." As the final rounds of the trial approached, Selene knew one thing for certain. Lyrakesh was not just a threat. She was a revolution that the galaxy did not want, and the one it might desperately need. "I will put an end to this before it spirals out of control," Selene vowed to herself, her eyes narrowing with renewed focus. No matter what it takes. By the time Lyrakesh advanced to the final stage of the trials, the galaxy was in uproar. The intergalactic broadcast network's rating charts had shattered historical records. Every major spaceport, from the neon-lit slums of Orion's belt to the ivory towers of Zartan Prime, aired constant replays of Lyra's improbable victories. Children imitated her laser-pointer distraction move. Merch vendors hawked knockoff jackets with "just gonna wing it" stitched across the back. And the betting markets? They'd long since stopped making sense. A flashing red banner across the most trusted odds board now read, "System error. Uncalculated variable Human Lyra Kesh. Among the elite, panic began to creep in. The High Council Protocol, keepers of galactic tradition for millennia, held emergency closed-door sessions. Some whispered of nullifying the tournament on technical grounds. Others insisted that if Lyra won, the very concept of meritocracy would unravel. And yet, the people loved her. In the bustling mezzanine of the trial's observation deck, diplomats and military leaders rubbed elbows with street performers and spice merchants, all watching Lyra's latest training footage. Not that there was much training to speak of, just Lyra practicing her diplomacy face in front of a mirror by making exaggerated expressions. She winked at a diplomat from Tharsis 6 mid-negotiation. One official gasped, and then got him to apologize for threatening to bomb a moon. Another replied, slack-jawed. Even former competitors who'd face her began rethinking everything. Lord Cormac, once humiliated, now spoke of her with grudging respect. She sees the world differently, he admitted in a post-match interview. She doesn't dominate. She disrupts. Inside the preparation chamber for the final match, Lyra tossed a snack bar in the air and caught it between her teeth, sprawled out on a bench while everyone else reviewed strategies in silence. A rookie attendant approached her nervously, voice shaking. Queen Kesh, they're ready for you in the Hall of Judgment. Just Lyra, she said, mouth half full, but cool title. Might keep it later. She stood, cracking her neck and stretching as though headed to a casual meeting, and not the most pivotal political battle in the galaxy's recorded history. Her casual confidence had long since stopped being funny. It was now terrifying, because for the first time, even her staunchest critics had to admit she might actually win. And if she did, the galaxy wouldn't just get a new queen. It would get a revolution in boots and a scuff jacket. One that didn't follow the rules, didn't care about legacy, and didn't believe power had to look a certain way. Lyra wasn't just fighting for the throne anymore. She was fighting to prove that in a dying galaxy, the future didn't belong to tradition. It belonged to the unexpected. The Hall of Judgment stood silent as the galaxy's eyes converged on the center of the grand arena. The vast, cylindrical chamber was suspended in the heart of a collapsing nebula, surrounded by holographic projections of thousands of watching species, each one eager to witness the final confrontation between the two most unlikely rivals the trials had ever seen. On one side stood Queen Selene Varys, regal, composed, and adorned in intricate armor that pulsed with the weight of ancient power. Her every movement was calculated, each gesture a statement of precision. The atmosphere around her hummed with the energy of tradition. Every line of her form exuding the unwavering belief that the galaxy's future could only be secured by the old ways. On the other side stood Lyra Kesh, wearing her trademark leather jacket, boots scuffed from her wild journey. She stood with her hands in her pockets, half smiling, half waiting for the drama to kick in. Her disheveled appearance and carefree demeanor stood in stark contrast to the grandiosity of the moment. In the stands, there was no noise, just a collective breath held as the two contenders faced each other. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension. Lyra tilted her head, squinting at Selene. Nice armor, she said with a grin. Must have cost a few moons. Do you ever take that thing off? Selene's lips twitched into a tight, controlled smile, but there was a flicker of irritation in her eyes. Do not mistake my patience for weakness. Human, you will learn the consequences of your insolence. Lyra shrugged, unfazed. Yeah, heard that one before. But hey, at least it's impressive. She took a casual step forward, her boots clicking against the floor. You've got the whole royal vibe going. Me? I'm just here for the fun of it. Selene's eyes narrowed as the ground between them began to shift, a symbolic representation of the trial beginning to form. The arena morphed into an environment that favored strategy, an ancient war room with maps, tactical layouts, and projections of intergalactic territory. Without warning, Selene's voice rang out, commanding, "Time to end this. I invoke the ritual of dominance." Her hand rose, and the floor beneath them hummed to life. Golden threads of energy twisted through the air, spinning into a complex, glowing sigil that pulsated with a deep, resonant hum. It was a symbol of control, of complete and total mastery. Selene was preparing to overwhelm Lyra, with the sheer weight of tradition. Lyra didn't even flinch. She leaned back on her heels and pulled out her datapad. Cool, but I think I've got a better idea. Celine's eyes flickered with frustration. What is she doing? She was using the ancient ritual of dominance, a move that had never failed. Every opponent who faced it had been reduced to nothing, crushed under its weight. But Lyra was different. She wasn't even trying to fight the magic directly. Instead, Lyra opened an app on her datapad. The screen flashed with a logo, a simple sound meter. She swiped a finger across the screen, adjusting a frequency. What is this nonsense? Celine sneered, her voice laced with disdain. Lyra grinned widely. Just gotta find the right frequency. Trust me. She tapped the final button. A high-pitched whine emanated from the datapad, rising in pitch until it cut to the shimmering golden sigil in the air. The ritual of dominance faltered. The threads of energy around them began to tremble, vibrating violently as if fighting against a dissonance. Celine froze, her concentration momentarily broken. Impossible? How? Lyra winked, giving her a half-sarcastic salute. Turns out resonant frequencies mess with everything, even your fancy spells. The ritual of dominance collapsed into chaos. The sigils disintegrated, swirling into a vortex of gold and light. Celine was momentarily stunned, her well-laid plans disrupted. Without missing a beat, Lyra stepped forward, casually dodging a blast of energy from Celine's raised hand. You know, this whole traditional thing is nice and all, but I'm more of a keep-it-loose and unpredictable kind of person. Celine's eyes burned with fury, her voice low and threatening. You will not mock me, human. I am the queen. I am the galaxy. The space around them shimmered, bending and folding as Celine called upon her true power, manipulating the very fabric of reality to her will. She sent waves of force crashing toward Lyra, lightning bolts, gravity wells, and razor-sharp beams of energy. But Lyra was already moving. She sidestepped the blast with graceful ease, her jacket flying out behind her as she twirled. Man, this is way too intense, she muttered, pulling a small device from her belt. It was a personal deflector shield, a cheap, throwaway tech she'd picked up during her travels. With a single flick, she activated it, deflecting a searing blast of energy that ricocheted off the shield and sent a wave of static across the arena. Celine snarled, watching as Lyra danced through her attacks, completely unpredictable, breaking every rule Celine had ever known. You think you can defeat me with tricks? Celine spat. You think this is a game? This is destiny, child. You cannot defeat tradition. Lyra stopped for a moment, holding up her hands in mock surrender. Okay. You got the whole destiny thing locked down. But really, do we have to take this so seriously? I mean, this is a galaxy we're talking about, not some stuffy old board game. The crowd in the stands shifted uneasily, murmurs spreading like wildfire. This wasn't the final match they had anticipated. This wasn't about who had the best technique or the strongest will. This was a clash of ideologies. Precision versus adaptability. Tradition versus chaos. And in that moment, it became clear. Lyra wasn't here to play by the rules. She was here to break them. Celine's fury built to an almost unbearable level, and with a roar, she summoned a final, all-consuming burst of energy, bending the very space around them. But Lyra, unbothered, unimpressed, merely stepped forward with a grin, as though this were just another Monday morning. Okay, she said casually. Here's my final move. She pulled out a small button from her jacket pocket, something no one had expected. A simple, everyday item, a rubber chicken. With a single click, the rubber chicken squeaked and the energy around them exploded in a final, shocking twist. Celine's power faltered, overwhelmed by the absurdity and unpredictability of Lyra's method. The very chaos of Lyra's humor, her defiance of all expectations, shattered Celine's control. For a moment, everything paused. Then, slowly, Celine's eyes widened, her form flickering, as she realized Lyra had won. Lyra Kesh, the girl who never took anything seriously, had just outsmarted the galaxy's most powerful ruler. She threw Celine a cheeky grin. And that, my dear queen, is how you change the game. The crowd erupted into stunned silence before breaking into wild cheers. Lyra Kesh had won, and with her victory, she had reshaped the future of the galaxy, one rule at a time. The arena remained eerily silent as Lyra Kesh stood in the center, her stance casual yet undeniably victorious. The holographic projections flickered and hummed, showing the galaxy's reaction to the final moment, an explosion of both shock and awe. Queen Selene, once untouchable, now lay defeated, her traditional reign shattered not by power, but by the very unpredictability she had always scorned. Lyra looked down at her hands, still tingling from the aftermath of the battle. For a moment, it felt almost surreal. There were no grand speeches, no intricate rituals to mark her victory. Just the quiet hum of the dying nebula around them and the faint scent of ozone from the final surge of Selene's energy. The Queen's figure flickered, her once imposing presence now reduced to a mere echo of its former glory. Her armor, shattered, lay in pieces at her feet. In that moment, Selene wasn't just defeated in battle. She was dethroned in the very principle she had fought to uphold. Lyra approached her slowly, a faint grin tugging at the corner of her lips. Well, that was fun. Selene, still recovering from the loss, narrowed her eyes, her voice laced with bitterness, but also something akin to respect. You don't play by the rules. But that's why you won. Lyra chuckled, stepping back and throwing a nonchalant glance at the surrounding crowd, now buzzing with excitement and disbelief. Who says there have to be rules? Across the galaxy, reactions were swift and unrelenting. The High Council protocol, having no choice but to acknowledge the outcome, quickly shifted its stance. Political leaders, diplomats, and military commanders began to reevaluate the very structure that had held the galaxy in place for millennia. Was the old system still valid? Could a new, more flexible order emerge from the ashes of tradition? Lyra didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for certain. Change was inevitable. As she left the Hall of Judgment, her steps light and confident, a quiet reflection settled over her. This wasn't just about winning the throne or defeating Selene. It was about proving that the galaxy didn't have to be bound by the old ways. Tradition, after all, wasn't a chain. It was an opportunity to evolve. In a secluded chamber, Lyra stood before a massive viewport, gazing out at the vast, dying galaxy stretching before her. Nebulas, stars, and planets all seemed to hum with a new kind of energy, one that whispered of beginnings, not endings. Perfection doesn't leave room for evolution, she thought to herself, echoing a line she'd heard in passing during her journey. It resonated deeply. Rules aren't limits, they're opportunities. Behind her, a low, metallic voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Cormac, the once proud combatant who had been defeated in the earlier rounds. He had come to pay his respects. "You've changed everything," he said simply, his voice holding a note of awe. "The galaxy will never be the same after today." Lyra turned to face him, her gaze thoughtful. "Maybe not, but maybe that's a good thing." She smiled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "You know, if we're going to fix this place, we might want to start by getting rid of all those really old rules. I mean, who needs them, right?" Cormac gave a reluctant laugh, his once arrogant demeanor softened by the truth in her words. "Maybe we could start with a monarchy." Lyra chuckled. "Sure, why not? Let's see what happens when we shake things up a bit." As the two of them stood together, the distant hum of the galaxy seemed to echo with a new possibility, one of evolution, not stagnation. And in the quiet aftermath of her improbable victory, Lyra Kesh had, in her own chaotic, unpredictable way, ignited a fire for change. It was a fire that couldn't be extinguished, a fire that would continue to burn brightly across the stars, shaping the galaxy in ways no one could predict. The reign of Queen Selene was over. A new era had begun. And as for Lyra, she was ready to write the next chapter, one rule at a time. The galaxy had barely begun to process the events of the trials, yet the ripple effects were already undeniable. Political alliances trembled, old empires questioned their purpose, and the High Council protocol scrambled to adapt or face irrelevance. Lyra Kesh stood on the balcony of a newly established galactic assembly, the first of its kind, a chaotic blend of diplomats, former enemies, and eccentric revolutionaries. Below, The once monolithic symbol of monarchy lay in ruins, replaced by a council of diverse voices and ideas. The stars above shimmered as if responding to the possibilities that had just been unlocked. A soft beep echoed from her wrist communicator. She glanced at it and smiled. "All systems go for the new council meetings tomorrow, Your Highness," a voice said over the line. Lyra snorted. "Please, don't call me that. I'm just here to break things, not be things." The voice on the other end hesitated, then responded cautiously. "Understood. You're, Lyra." Lyra leaned back against the cool railing, her eyes scanning the horizon. The galaxy was wide, its potential endless, but it was no longer the same place it had been. Celine's reign was over, but that was just the beginning. Her gaze flickered to the horizon, where a fleet of ships, once aligned with the old regime, now hovered in formation, waiting for her decision. "Change isn't a small thing," Lyra muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "And I have a feeling we're only scratching the surface." A flicker of movement caught her eye. In the distance, something large and oddly familiar was approaching, a massive ship that had once belonged to the old monarchy. But this time, it wasn't a symbol of oppression. This time, it was coming to see her. Lyra smiled, a glint of mischief dancing in her eyes. Well, looks like I've got a few more rules to break." And with that, she turned and walked back into the heart of the new galaxy she was about to reshape. But as she did, a voice echoed through her mind, something whispered across the stars by those who had been watching, waiting for this moment. The galaxy was dying, but maybe, just maybe, it's time to teach it how to live again. The future was unwritten, and Lyra Kesh was ready to write it. In the galaxy's greatest revolution, the biggest question wasn't whether the old guard would fall. It was what new rules the future would create, and who would break them next. She looked out across the arena, taking a deep breath as the reality of her achievement sank in. The rules had changed, and it was only the beginning. As the cheers faded and Kaelin stood amidst the debris of the arena, a simple thought drifted into her mind. What next? Her victory had sent shockwaves across the galaxy, but Kaelin knew this was only the beginning. The Zalorians weren't the only ones who had underestimated humanity. Every alien race, every ancient galactic institution, and every arrogant warrior would now have to reconsider their view of humans. She wiped the last trace of sweat from her brow and glanced down at the message flashing across her communications device. It was from Earth Command. "Well done, Kaelin. Consider this a successful test run. Now, prepare for the real mission." Kaelin grinned. She had gone from being a human fluke to the galaxy's most unpredictable force, and she had no intention of stopping here. "Send the rest," she muttered, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "The universe won't know what hit it." Across the galaxy, commanders, warriors, and scholars alike were already whispering, wondering what Kaelin would do next, and whether they were ready for whatever she had in mind. The universe was about to discover that humanity wasn't just a species to be reckoned with. It was a force of nature that would forever change the balance of power. And Kaelin, the human who had defied the odds, was only just getting started.